Mom, what the hell is that sold sign doing on our lawn?
David's voice shattered the evening silence as he stood frozen in the driveway, Hawaiian tan draining from his face. The suitcases crashed to the ground, designer luggage worth more than Mary had spent on herself in years. 40 years of sacrifice, 40 years of invisibility, 40 years of being treated like furniture in her own home, all leading to this moment. Mary sat waiting in the empty house, lips curved in the smallest smile, while her family discovered what the servant they'd planned to discard had done. The house was gone, sold, finished, and the woman they thought they owned had already disappeared. Welcome to Story Theater. Take your seat, silence your phones and get ready to enjoy the story. Mary Thompson sat in the worn leather armchair that had held her body for 20 years. Her 65-year-old hands rested on the armrests, fingers tracing the familiar grooves where the leather had cracked and softened. The late afternoon sun slanted through the living room windows of the single-story house on Willow Creek Road, casting long shadows across the hardwood floor she had polished every Saturday morning for decades. The room around her looked different now. Brown cardboard boxes stood stacked against the wall, where her china cabinet used to be. Each box bore labels written in her careful handwriting: kitchen items, photo albums, winter clothes. The walls showed pale rectangles where picture frames had hung, ghosts of the family. Photographs that once documented birthdays, graduations, and Christmas mornings. The house felt hollow, like a shell emptied of its life. Through the window, Mary could see the red and white sign planted in the middle of her front lawn. Sold. The word stood bold against the afternoon light, final and irreversible. She had watched the realtor hammer it into the grass 3 days ago. Each strike of the mallet driving home the reality of what she had done. The young couple who bought the house had walked through these rooms with bright eyes and excited whispers, planning where their furniture would go, which room would be the nursery. Mary had stood in the kitchen doorway, invisible to them, watching their dreams unfold in the space where hers had slowly withered. Her hands tightened slightly on the armrests as she heard the familiar sound of tires crunching on the gravel driveway. The engine cut off. Car doors slammed. David's voice carried through the still air, saying something to Jessica about the traffic on Interstate 84. Their vacation to Hawaii had given them golden tans and relaxed smiles. Mary could see them through the window as they pulled matching luggage from the trunk of their SUV. David in his Tommy Bahama shirt and Jessica in a flowing sundress that probably cost more than Mary's monthly grocery budget. They hadn't noticed the sign yet. They were too busy discussing dinner plans, Jessica's voice rising and falling in that particular way she had when she was making decisions for everyone. Mary watched as David lifted the suitcases and started toward the front door. Then he stopped. His head turned toward the lawn. The suitcases dropped from his hands and hit the concrete path with a thud that Mary could hear from inside. Jessica followed his gaze. Her hand flew to her mouth. They both stood frozen for a long moment, staring at the sign as if it might disappear if they looked hard enough. Then they were running toward the door, leaving the luggage abandoned on the path. The front door burst open. Mary didn't move from her chair. She kept her eyes on the window, on the view of the maple tree she had planted the year David was born. Its leaves were turning gold now, preparing for their final performance before winter. Mom. David's voice cracked like a teenager's. He stood in the doorway of the living room, chest heaving, eyes wild. What is that sign doing on our lawn? Mary turned her head slowly to look at her son. His face had gone pale beneath the Hawaiian tan. Behind him, Jessica pushed forward, her perfectly styled blonde hair now disheveled from running. Her eyes darted around the room, taking in the boxes, the bare walls, the missing furniture. Where's the china cabinet? Jessica's voice came out sharp and high. Where are all the pictures? Mary, what have you done? Mary folded her hands in her lap. The wedding ring she still wore after all these years caught the light. She had polished it that morning, one last time in this house. Her voice, when it came, was steady and calm as a lake at dawn. I sold the house. The words hung in the air. David's mouth opened and closed like a fish pulled from water. Jessica's face went from pale to red in seconds. You sold it? David finally managed to speak. You sold our house? Without telling us? Without asking us? Mary tilted her head slightly, considering his words. It's not your house, David. It never was. The deed is in my name. Has been since your father died. But we live here. Jessica's voice climbed higher. Our children live here. Their rooms, their things. Everything is here. Your things are in the garage, Mary said. All labeled and ready for the moving truck. The children's belongings too. I was very careful with everything. David took a step forward. Then another, until he stood directly in front of her chair. His shadow fell across her, and for a moment, Mary was reminded of when he was 16 and would tower over her during arguments about curfew. But she wasn't the same woman anymore. She looked up at him without flinching. Mom, this is insane. You can't just sell the house. Where are we supposed to go? You're both 42 years old, Mary said. You'll figure it out. I did, when I was 23 with a baby and a husband in the ground. Jessica pushed past David, her hands clenched into fists. When do we have to be out? When is closing? Tomorrow, Mary said. The new owners take possession at noon. The silence that followed was complete. Even the old house seemed to hold its breath. David sank onto the couch, or what was left of it. Mary had sold the good furniture and left only the necessities for these last days. His head dropped into his hands. Mom, why? The anger had drained from his voice, leaving only confusion. Why would you do this to us? Mary stood up from her chair. Her back protested, the damaged discs sending sharp reminders of all the years of bending, lifting, carrying. She walked to the window and looked out at the sold sign, at the maple tree, at the street where she had spent 40 years of her life. I'm moving tomorrow too, she said to the window. To a cottage by the sea. Just me. Behind her, Jessica made a sound like a wounded animal. What about the kids? Who's going to watch them after school? Who's going to make their dinner? Mary turned around. For the first time in years, she really looked at her son and his wife. They stood in her empty living room, looking lost, like children who had wandered away from their parents at the store. But they weren't children. The lines around David's eyes, the silver threading through Jessica's blonde hair, these were middle-aged people who had somehow never learned to stand on their own feet. You will, Mary said simply. Their parents will take care of them. Like parents are supposed to do. She walked past them toward the hallway that led to her bedroom. Her footsteps echoed on the bare floor. At the doorway, she paused and looked back. They hadn't moved. They stood among the boxes and shadows, like actors who had forgotten their lines. There's soup on the stove, she said. Help yourselves. It's the last meal I'll cook in this kitchen. She left them there and walked down the hallway. In her bedroom, more boxes waited. Her clothes were packed, her jewelry. The few books she couldn't bear to leave behind. On the nightstand sat a single photograph, not a family portrait, but a picture of herself at 25, holding baby David, standing in front of this very house on the day they moved in. She had been so young, so full of hope, so ready to build a life within these walls. Mary picked up the photograph and traced her younger self's face with one finger. That woman had believed that sacrifice was love, that giving everything meant you would receive gratitude in return. That woman had spent 40 years learning how wrong she was. From the living room, she could hear David and Jessica's voices rising and falling in heated discussion. Planning, probably. Trying to figure out how to stop this. How to fix this. How to keep their comfortable life from collapsing. Mary sat on the edge of the bed and continued packing. She folded her clothes with the same careful precision she had used for 40 years of laundry. David's football uniforms, Jessica's delicate blouses, the grandchildren's tiny socks. Always their clothes first, hers last, if there was time. Tomorrow, she thought, she would wake up to the sound of the ocean. Tomorrow, she would make breakfast for one, drink coffee while it was still hot. Read a book without interruption. Tomorrow, for the first time in 40 years, she would live a life that belonged entirely to her. The sun was setting now, painting the walls of her bedroom orange and gold. Through the thin walls, she could hear Jessica crying, and David trying to comfort her. They would survive this, Mary knew. They would find an apartment, learn to manage their own lives. Discover what it meant to be adults without a safety net made of her bones and exhaustion. And maybe, years from now, they would understand why she had to leave. Or maybe they never would. Mary found, as she closed the last box and sealed it with tape, that she no longer cared which it would be. She had given them 40 years. The rest of her life, however many years remained, would be hers alone. The morning alarm never woke Mary Thompson. Her body had learned the rhythm of 4:30 in the morning so deeply that she opened her eyes in the darkness moments before the clock would sound. She reached out and pressed the button before it could disturb anyone else in the house. This was her ritual, performed every morning for 35 years at the Cascade View Hotel, where she worked as head housekeeper. In the bathroom, she moved like a ghost, washing her face with cold water to chase away the last threads of sleep. The mirror showed a woman of 30, then 40, then 50, the years blurring together in the repetition of identical mornings. She pulled her graying hair into the same tight bun she had worn since her first day at the hotel. The uniform hung on the back of the door: navy blue dress, white collar, name tag that read, Mary T. in faded letters. The Cascade View Hotel sat on the eastern edge of Portland, a 3-star establishment that catered to business travelers and families passing through Oregon. Mary knew every room, every corner, every stain on the carpets that wouldn't come out no matter how hard she scrubbed. She had started there when David was 6 months old, 3 weeks after they lowered her husband Robert into the ground. Robert had been working on the new overpass near Highway 26 when the scaffolding collapsed. The other workers said it happened fast. One moment he was securing rebar, the next he was falling through space. 28 years old, strong as an oak, dead before the ambulance arrived. The construction company sent flowers and a check for $2,000. There was no life insurance. Robert had always said they would get it next year, when money wasn't so tight, when the baby was older, when. Mary stood at his graveside with baby David in her arms and realized that, when, had become, never, and she was alone with a mortgage, a baby, and a high school diploma that qualified her for exactly nothing. The ad in the newspaper said the Cascade View Hotel needed housekeeping staff, no experience necessary. She had called that same day. Her supervisor during those early years was a woman named Helen, built like a brick house with arms that could flip a king-sized mattress without help. Helen had taken one look at Mary, exhausted and desperate, and said, "You show up on time and work hard, I'll make sure you keep this job." Mary had shown up on time every day since. The work was brutal on her body. Each room had to be cleaned in 20 minutes, strip the beds, fresh sheets, scrub the bathroom until it gleamed, vacuum, dust, replace the toiletries, arrange the furniture just so. On a busy day, she cleaned 20 rooms. That was 400 minutes of bending, lifting, scrubbing, her back screaming by room 15, her knees swollen by room 20. She learned to move efficiently, economically, saving motion where she could. She learned which cleaning products worked fastest, how to fold a fitted sheet in 10 seconds, how to spot a bedspread that could go another day without washing. She learned to smile at guests who complained about imaginary problems, to nod when managers who had never cleaned a toilet told her how to do her job better, to keep her face neutral when she found things in rooms that would have made her younger self blush or weep. The money was never enough, but it was steady. Minimum wage plus the occasional tip from a generous guest, though most people never thought to tip the woman who cleaned up after them. She bought David's clothes at thrift stores, learned to make soup from bones and vegetable scraps, canceled the cable and told David that books were better than television anyway. "Why don't you get a better job, Mom?" David had asked her once when he was 16, embarrassed when his friends found out his mother was a hotel maid. Mary had been standing at the stove, stirring a pot of beans that would be their dinner for the 3rd night in a row. She turned to look at her son, tall and handsome like his father had been, wearing the Nike shoes she had saved 3 months to buy. "This job puts food on the table and keeps a roof over your head," she had said quietly. "There's no shame in honest work." David had rolled his eyes and retreated to his room, but he never asked again. Years passed in a blur of identical days. She watched David graduate high school, then college, the first in her family to get a degree. She stood in the crowd at his wedding to Jessica, a pretty girl from a middle-class family who looked at Mary's calloused hands with barely concealed distaste. When the grandchildren came first Emma, then little Ryan. Mary added another shift to her life. 3 o'clock in the afternoon, she would clock out at the hotel and drive straight to David and Jessica's apartment. They both worked until 6, David at his accounting firm, Jessica selling real estate. Mary would pick up the children from school, help with homework, start dinner. By the time their parents came home, the kids were fed, bathed, homework completed. "Thanks, Mom," David would say, grabbing a beer from the fridge while Jessica checked her phone. "You're a lifesaver." "Yes. Thank you, Mary," Jessica would add, not looking up from her screen. "Same time tomorrow?" And Mary would nod, gather her things, drive home to her empty house, where she would eat a sandwich over the sink, too tired to sit down, too tired to cook another meal just for herself. The thank yous came less frequently as time went on. They transformed from gratitude to expectation. Mary became furniture in their lives, as essential and unnoticed as the kitchen sink. She was there when Emma got sick at school and needed to be picked up. She was there when Ryan broke his arm at soccer practice. She was there for parent-teacher conferences when David and Jessica had important meetings, for Saturday date nights, for the weekend. Jessica's mother visited and they needed the house to themselves. Her back grew worse each year. The hotel doctor, a tired man who saw all the housekeepers, prescribed pain pills and told her to rest. Rest. Mary almost laughed. When was there time to rest? Morning shift at the hotel, afternoon shift with the grandchildren, weekends catching up on her own housework. Her own life compressed into the margins of everyone else's needs. She started waking up at night with spasms that made her bite her pillow to keep from screaming. Her fingers grew thick with arthritis. Her knees clicked when she climbed stairs. But every morning, 4:30 came, and she rose in the darkness, put on her uniform, and went to work. Helen retired and was replaced by a manager half Mary's age who had ideas about efficiency and customer service. The 20-minute room cleaning became 15 minutes. New chemicals that made her eyes water and her lungs burn. Complaints if the toilet paper wasn't folded into a point, if the remote control wasn't positioned exactly parallel to the television. "Mary, you need to pick up the pace," the new manager, Brandon, would say, checking his clipboard. "The younger girls are finishing their floors faster than you." The younger girls were 20 years old with strong backs and no children waiting for them after work. But Mary would nod and push harder, move faster, ignore the shooting pains that traveled from her spine to her feet. One afternoon, she was cleaning room 412 when she found a $100 bill under the pillow. A tip, maybe, or forgotten by the guest. She held it up to the light, thinking of all the things that money could buy: a new pair of shoes that didn't hurt her feet, a heating pad for her back, maybe even a nice dinner somewhere that wasn't her own kitchen or her son's. She put the money on the nightstand where the guest would see it if they returned, and finished cleaning the room. That evening, as she stood in David's kitchen making spaghetti for the children, Emma looked up from her homework and said, "Grandma, why are you always here?" Mary's hand stilled on the wooden spoon. "What do you mean, sweetheart? You're always here when we get home. Don't you have your own house?" Before Mary could answer, Jessica's voice came from the living room. "Don't be rude, Emma. Grandma helps us because that's what grandmas do. That's what grandmas do." As if it were written in stone, predetermined, requiring no thanks, no recognition, no understanding of the body breaking down in service to others. Mary stirred the sauce and said nothing, but that night she lay in bed and counted the years she had left until retirement. 10 more years of rooms to clean, meals to cook, children to raise who weren't her own. She thought of Robert sometimes, wondered what life would have been like if the scaffolding had held. Would they have had more children? Would she have stayed home, tending her own garden instead of scrubbing other people's toilets? Would her back be straight, her hands smooth, her son more grateful? But those were questions without answers, paths that had closed the moment Robert fell. All she had was this life, these choices, this body that carried her through each day despite its protests. She had survived. She had raised her son. She had been useful. "Thank you, Mom," David used to say. But somewhere along the way, even those simple words had disappeared, dissolved into the assumption that Mary would always be there, always available. always willing to give more of herself until there was nothing left but a shell, moving through the motions of service. The alarm would ring at 4:30 tomorrow. It always did. The pandemic arrived like a thief in the night, stealing jobs and certainty from millions. Mary watched the news in her living room as the governor announced lockdowns, her hands folded in her lap, wondering what would become of the world. The Cascade View Hotel closed its doors indefinitely. After 35 years of never missing a day, Mary found herself at home with nowhere to go at 4:30 in the morning. 2 weeks into the lockdown, David called. His voice on the phone was different, smaller, frightened in a way she hadn't heard since he was a boy with nightmares. "Mom, I've been laid off," he said. "The whole accounting department. And Jessica hasn't shown a house in 3 weeks. Nobody's buying anything." Mary stood in her kitchen, looking out at the backyard where the spring flowers were blooming, oblivious to the chaos in the human world. "What do you need?" she asked, though she already knew. "Could we stay with you for a bit? Just until things get back to normal. Maybe a month or 2. We can't make rent without our jobs, and the landlord already served us notice." A month or 2. Mary heard the words and knew they were wishes, not plans. But David was her son, and Emma and Ryan were her grandchildren, and what else could she say? "Of course," she said. "Come home." They arrived on a Thursday afternoon in a rented truck, their lives packed into boxes labeled with Jessica's neat handwriting. David carried in their bedroom furniture while Jessica directed where everything should go. The children, 11-year-old Emma and 9-year-old Ryan, ran through the house exploring, their voices filling spaces that had been quiet for years. "We'll help with everything," Jessica said that first night, standing in Mary's kitchen with a glass of wine. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and without her usual makeup, she looked younger, more vulnerable. "We'll split the chores, share the cooking. It'll be like a big family adventure." For the first weeks, it almost was. They established routines. David cooked breakfast, Mary handled lunch, Jessica made dinner. They did jigsaw puzzles at the dining room table and watched movies together in the evenings. The children did their online school at the kitchen table while Mary helped with math problems. David fixed the leaky faucet she had been meaning to repair and cleaned out the gutters. Jessica organized the pantry and planted vegetables in the backyard. Mary found herself enjoying the fullness of the house, the sound of footsteps overhead, the laughter from the children's rooms. She had been alone for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to be part of a living, breathing family unit. But as weeks turned to months and the pandemic wore on, the honeymoon ended. David grew depressed, spending hours in front of his laptop searching for jobs that didn't exist. He stopped cooking breakfast, stopped fixing things, stopped talking much at all. He would sit on the couch in his pajamas until noon, staring at the television without really watching. Jessica's transformation was different. As David retreated, she expanded, filling the house with her presence and opinions. She rearranged the living room furniture without asking. She threw out Mary's old magazines and replaced them with her own subscriptions. She started making decisions about groceries, about the children's schedules, about when and what they would eat. The first time it happened, Mary thought she had misheard. "Mary, could you make sure dinner is ready by 6 sharp, please? The kids get cranky if they eat too late." Mary had been standing at the sink, washing the lunch dishes. Her hands stilled in the soapy water. She turned to look at Jessica, who was sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop, not even looking up. 6 sharp, Mary repeated slowly. "Yes, please. And nothing too heavy. Ryan's been having stomach issues." Mary nodded and turned back to the dishes, but something cold had settled in her chest. This was her kitchen, her house, her sink where she was washing dishes. But Jessica had spoken to her the way she might speak to hired help. It got worse gradually, like a pot coming to boil so slowly you don't notice until it's bubbling over. Jessica developed opinions about everything Mary did. The way she folded towels was wrong. The laundry detergent she used wasn't organic enough. The windows needed cleaning more often. "Mary, when you do the laundry, please don't mix our clothes with yours," Jessica said one morning, holding up one of David's shirts as if it were contaminated. "I like to use special fabric softener for our things. Our things. Our clothes." As if Mary's belongings were somehow inferior, potentially contaminating. Mary took the shirt and nodded, her throat too tight to speak. Jessica started leaving notes. Mary would find them on the counter, written in that perfect handwriting. Mary, please vacuum Emma's room today. Mary, the bathroom needs attention. Mary, we're out of the good coffee. The good coffee. The one Jessica liked, which cost 3 times more than the brand Mary had drunk for decades. But Mary bought it on her next grocery run, along with the organic milk and the special bread and the vitamins Jessica insisted the children needed. One evening, Mary was cooking dinner pot roast, the way she had made it for 40 years, the way David had always loved it. Jessica walked into the kitchen, sniffed, and wrinkled her nose. What is that smell? Pot roast, Mary said, lifting the lid to check the meat. Jessica peered into the pot with obvious distaste. All that fat. Don't you think we should be eating healthier? The children don't need all those calories. Mary looked at the meal she had been preparing for 3 hours. The same meal that had fed David through his childhood, that had been their Sunday tradition for decades. David asked for it, she said quietly. David asks for a lot of things that aren't good for him, Jessica replied. And there was something in her tone that made Mary feel small and foolish, like a grandmother out of touch with modern ways. That night at dinner, Jessica picked at her food and made comments about cholesterol and carcinogens. While David ate in silence and the children asked for seconds, Mary sat at her own table, in her own house, and felt like an intruder. The house began to feel different. Jessica had taken over the master bedroom, Mary's room, insisting it made more sense since they were a couple and needed the space. Mary had moved to the small guest room, sleeping on a twin bed while David and Jessica occupied the queen bed she had bought with Robert all those years ago. Jessica redecorated gradually. New curtains appeared in the living room. The old coffee table was moved to the garage and replaced with something modern and glass. Family photos were taken down and replaced with abstract art Jessica ordered online. It brightens the place up, Jessica explained, not asking, just informing. Mary watched her home transform into something unrecognizable. She spent more time in her small room, reading or just sitting on the narrow bed, listening to the sounds of the family that had taken over her house. Jessica's voice carried through the walls, always directing, always managing. David, tell your mother we need more paper towels. David, ask your mother if she paid the water bill. David, your mother left the porch light on again. Your mother, not mom, not Mary. Your mother, like she was David's responsibility, his burden to manage. One afternoon, Mary was doing laundry, separating their clothes from hers, as instructed when she heard Jessica on the phone with her sister. It's not ideal, Jessica was saying, but at least we're saving money. Mary does all the housework, so I can focus on trying to restart my business. It's like having a live-in maid, honestly. A live-in maid, in her own house. Mary stood in the laundry room, holding David's shirt, the one that couldn't touch her clothes, and felt something inside her break. Not dramatically, not all at once, but a small crack, like the first fissure in a dam. She folded the shirt carefully, precisely, and placed it in the basket marked, David and Jessica, in Jessica's handwriting. That evening, when Jessica announced that dinner should be at 6 sharp, please, and could Mary make something lighter tomorrow? Maybe a salad. Mary nodded and smiled and said nothing. She served the meal, cleaned the dishes, wiped the counters, and retired to her small room. She sat on the twin bed and looked at her hands, the same hands that had built this home, paid for every brick, painted every wall. Now they were the hands of a servant in her own house, following orders from a woman who had contributed nothing to these walls except her presence and her demands. Outside her window, she could see the maple tree she had planted, its leaves green and full in the summer evening. It had grown tall and strong, rooted in soil she had tended. But inside the house, Mary had become something else, transplanted, rootless, withering in the shadow of Jessica's expanding presence. Tomorrow, Jessica would have more instructions. The day after, more complaints. And Mary would nod and comply because that's what she did, what she had always done. She served, she endured, she made herself smaller so others could feel large. But that night, lying in the narrow bed in the guest room of her own house, Mary began to dream of somewhere else. Somewhere quiet, Somewhere hers. Somewhere she could exist without permission, without apology, without being reminded that she was just the help who happened to own the deed. The pain started as whispers and grew into screams. Mary would wake at 3 in the morning, not from habit but from the fire that ran from her lower spine down through her left leg. She would lie still in the narrow guest room bed, biting the inside of her cheek, counting to 100, then 200, waiting for the spasm to pass. Sometimes it took an hour. Sometimes it never fully went away, just dulled to a constant ache that followed her through the day like a shadow. She had learned to hide it well. After 40 years of working through pain, Mary had mastered the art of keeping her face neutral while her body betrayed her. She would grip the kitchen counter when no one was looking, letting it take her weight while she caught her breath. She kept a bottle of ibuprofen hidden behind the flour container, taking them dry when Jessica wasn't watching, because Jessica had opinions about pharmaceutical companies and chemical dependencies. The morning it happened, Mary was carrying a laundry basket up from the basement. David's work clothes, Jessica's delicates, the children's school uniforms all separated and washed according to Jessica's detailed instructions. The basket wasn't particularly heavy, no heavier than the hundreds she had carried before. But as she placed her foot on the third step, something shifted in her back. Not a pop or a crack, but a sliding sensation, like tectonic plates moving inside her spine. The basket fell from her hands. Clothes scattered across the basement stairs. Mary grabbed the railing with both hands, her knuckles white, her body frozen in a position halfway between standing and falling. The pain was so intense that her vision went black at the edges. She couldn't breathe, she couldn't think, she could only hold on and wait for it to pass. Mary? Jessica's voice came from the top of the stairs. What was that noise? Mary tried to speak, but only a small gasp came out. She heard footsteps, then Jessica appeared at the top of the stairs, looking down at the scattered laundry with obvious irritation. Oh, Mary, you dropped everything. Those need to be re-washed now. The basement floor is filthy. Mary managed to nod, still gripping the railing, still unable to move. Jessica sighed dramatically and disappeared. No offer to help, no question about whether Mary was hurt. Just annoyance at the inconvenience. It took Mary 20 minutes to gather the clothes and climb the stairs. Each movement was calculated, careful, her body moving like a broken machine. She re-washed everything, hung it to dry, started dinner. By evening, she could barely walk, shuffling from counter to stove like someone 3 times her 65 years. What's wrong with Grandma? Ryan asked at dinner, his 9-year-old eyes noticing what the adults ignored. Nothing, sweetheart, Mary said, forcing a smile. Just a little tired. David looked up from his phone for a moment, seemed about to say something, then returned to scrolling. Jessica was discussing her plans to restart her real estate business. Talking about virtual tours and digital marketing, oblivious to Mary's careful movements as she cleared the table. That night, Mary couldn't lie down. The pain was too intense. She sat in the chair in her small room, trying to find a position that didn't make her want to scream. At 4 in the morning, she called the doctor's office and left a message. She needed help. She couldn't do this anymore. The appointment was for 2 weeks later, the soonest they could see her. Mary marked the days on the calendar hidden in her room, each a small victory of survival. She took more ibuprofen than was safe, used heating pads until her skin was red and raw. Did stretches she found on the internet that only seemed to make things worse. Mary, the bathroom needs a deep clean, Jessica said one morning, finding Mary sitting at the kitchen table, trying to summon the strength to stand. The grout is looking gray. Mary nodded and pushed herself up, her hand pressed against her lower back. She spent 3 hours on her hands and knees, scrubbing grout with a toothbrush while tears streamed down her face. Not from emotion, just from pain, pure physical pain that her body produced like sweat. The day of the appointment, Mary told them she was going to the doctor. What for? Jessica asked, barely looking up from her laptop. My back. It's getting worse. Well, don't be too long. Emma has a science project due tomorrow and she needs help. Mary drove herself to the medical center, each bump in the road sending lightning through her spine. In the waiting room, she watched other patients, some with walkers, some in wheelchairs, some walking normally. She wondered what their families were like. Did anyone wait at home, worried? Did anyone ask how they felt? Dr. Martinez was young, probably Ryan's age in 30 years. He had gentle hands and a concerned expression as he examined her, asking her to bend, to twist, to rate her pain on a scale of 1 to 10. "I need to send you for an MRI, he said, typing notes into his computer. "But based on the physical exam, I suspect significant disc degeneration. Multiple levels. How long have you been dealing with this?" "Years," Mary admitted. "But it's gotten much worse recently." The MRI confirmed what Dr. Martinez suspected. 3 herniated discs, spinal stenosis, nerve compression. He showed her the images on his computer screen, pointing to the places where her spine looked crushed, twisted, wrong. "You need surgery," he said simply. "This isn't going to get better on its own. If anything, it will continue to deteriorate. You could lose feeling in your leg, lose bladder control. This is serious, Mary." Surgery. The word sat heavy in the room. Mary thought about the recovery time, the cost, the weeks she would need help. "How long is the recovery?" 6 to 8 weeks before you can resume normal activities. You'll need someone to help you for at least the first 2 weeks. You won't be able to lift anything, bend, twist. You'll need help with basic tasks." Mary almost laughed. Help? From whom? She drove home with a surgery date 3 weeks away and a prescription for stronger pain medication. She found David and Jessica in the living room, Jessica showing him something on her laptop, both of them laughing at a video. "The doctor says I need back surgery," Mary said, standing in the doorway. They both looked up. David's face showed a flicker of concern. Jessica's showed calculation. "Surgery? When?" Jessica asked. 3 weeks. October 15th. October 15th? Jessica's voice rose. "That's the week of Emma's school play. And Ryan has his soccer tournament. Who's going to drive them? Who's going to take care of everything?" Mary stood there, holding her prescription bag, looking at her son and his wife. Jessica was already pulling up her calendar, frowning at the inconvenience. David had returned to looking at his phone. "I could die without this surgery," Mary said quietly. Jessica waved her hand dismissively. "Don't be dramatic, Mary. Back surgery is routine these days. But the timing is terrible. Can't you postpone it? Maybe after the holidays?" "After the holidays. After Emma's play. After Ryan's tournament. After Jessica's convenience." "No," Mary said, and walked to her room. The morning of the surgery came gray and cold. October 15th, 6:30 in the morning. Mary had been told to arrive 2 hours before the procedure. She dressed carefully in loose clothes that would be easy to remove and put back on. She had packed a small bag with the things she would need for the overnight stay. She walked into the kitchen to find it empty. No one was awake yet. She had reminded them yesterday, had written it on the calendar, had even asked David if he could drive her. "Oh, Mom, I have a job interview that morning," he had said. "First one in months. I can't miss it. Take an Uber." An Uber to spinal surgery. Mary called one and waited on the front porch, watching the sunrise paint the sky pink and gold. The driver was a young woman who chatted about the weather, unaware she was driving someone to face their fears alone. At the hospital, Mary filled out forms, signed consents, changed into the hospital gown that left her exposed and vulnerable. She lay on the gurney as nurses prepared IVs and checked vital signs. One of them, an older woman with kind eyes, looked at the emergency contact form. "Is your family coming?" she asked gently. "Someone should be here when you wake up." Mary forced a smile, the same smile she had perfected over 40 years of pretending things were fine. "They're busy. It's okay." The nurse touched her hand briefly, a moment of human connection that almost broke Mary's composure. Then she was being wheeled into the operating room, bright lights above, masked faces looking down. "Count backward from 10, the anesthesiologist said, placing the mask over her face. 10, 9, 8. She thought of David as a baby, holding her finger with his whole tiny hand. 7, 6. She thought of Robert, young and strong, promising they would grow old together. 5, 4. She thought of the house on Willow Creek Road, once so full of dreams. 3, 2. The last thing she thought, as the darkness took her, tears sliding from the corners of her eyes into her graying hair, was the truth that had been sitting in her chest like a stone for years. They don't even see me anymore. Then nothing. Just the deep, dreamless sleep of anesthesia, where pain couldn't follow, where she didn't have to pretend, where she could finally rest. Recovery was slower than the doctors had promised. Mary had been home from the hospital for 2 weeks, confined mostly to her small room, moving carefully like a person made of glass. The surgery had been successful, that's what Dr. Martinez said, but successful and painless were different things entirely. The incision site throbbed constantly, and she could feel the titanium screws they had put in her spine. Foreign objects that her body hadn't yet accepted as part of itself. David had picked her up from the hospital the day after surgery, arriving 40 minutes late with coffee on his breath and apologies about traffic. He had helped her into the car carefully, but she could see him checking his phone at every red light. Jessica hadn't come. The kids were at school, David explained, and someone had to be there when they got home. The first days home were the hardest. Mary wasn't supposed to bend, twist, or lift anything heavier than a coffee cup. She needed help to shower, to dress, to get in and out of bed. Jessica had created a schedule on the refrigerator who would help Mary and but the schedule had gaps, long stretches where Mary was alone with her pain and a bell Jessica had bought at the drugstore. Just ring if you need anything, Jessica had said, placing the small silver bell on Mary's nightstand. It looked like something you'd give a dying Victorian woman, Mary thought. Ring the bell and wait for mercy. But Mary rarely rang it. The few times she had, Jessica had appeared in the doorway with barely concealed irritation, sighing heavily before helping Mary to the bathroom or bringing her a glass of water. After the third time, Mary stopped ringing. She learned to wait, to hold her bladder until someone happened to check on her, to ration the water on her nightstand to last through the long afternoons. The pain medication made her drowsy but not unconscious. She drifted in and out of sleep, dreaming of her younger self, of Robert, of the hotel rooms she had cleaned thousands of times. Sometimes she woke not knowing where she was, the small guest room unfamiliar, the twin bed too narrow, the angle of light through the window wrong. It was Thursday afternoon, 17 days after surgery, when she heard the conversation that changed everything. Mary had managed to walk to the bathroom on her own, a victory that had taken 20 minutes and left her sweating with effort. She was making her way back to her room, one hand on the wall for support, when she heard voices from the living room. Jessica and David, speaking in the low tones people use when they think no one is listening. Mary stopped in the hallway. Not intentionally at first, she just needed to rest, to catch her breath. But then she heard her name, and something in Jessica's tone made her freeze. "We need to talk about your mother," Jessica was saying. Her voice had that quality it got when she was about to propose something she had already decided. "What about her?" David sounded tired, distracted. "This situation. It's not sustainable, David. She can barely take care of herself. What happens when she needs another surgery? What happens when she falls? We can't be her full-time caregivers." Mary pressed her back against the wall, her legs trembling from the effort of standing. She should move, should continue to her room, but her body wouldn't cooperate. She was frozen there, listening to her future being discussed like a problem to solve. "She's recovering," David said weakly. "The doctor said 6 to 8 weeks. And then what? She goes back to cleaning our house, cooking our meals, watching our kids? She can barely walk, David. She's becoming." Jessica paused, and Mary could picture her choosing her words carefully. "She's becoming a liability. A liability." Mary closed her eyes. "Like an old car that costs more to fix than it's worth." "What are you suggesting?" David asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. "Maybe we should look into assisted living for her." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Mary's hand flew to her mouth to stifle a gasp. Assisted living. Old people waiting to die, sitting in wheelchairs in hallways, forgotten by families who visited once a month, then once a year, then never. "Assisted living?" David repeated. "Mom's only 65. They have places for younger seniors too. Active communities, they call them. With medical staff on site, physical therapy, social activities. She'd probably be happier there. Mary heard the rustle of papers. Jessica had done research. Of course she had. Look at this one, Jessica continued. Sunset Manor. It's only 30 minutes away. They have a unit available next month. We could use the sale of this house to pay for it. The sale of this house. Mary's house. The house she had paid for with 40 years of broken backs and burnt hands. I don't know, Jess. It's her house. That we're living in. That we're maintaining. David, be realistic. Your mother is going to need more and more care. Do you want the kids growing up in a hospital ward? Do you want to spend your 40s and 50s as a caregiver? We have our own lives to think about. There was a long pause. Mary could hear her own heartbeat, loud as thunder in her ears. When David spoke again, his voice was so quiet she had to strain to hear it. It might be better for everyone. It might be better for everyone. Her son, her only child, the baby she had raised alone, the boy she had sacrificed everything for, thought it would be better for everyone if she was gone. Mary's legs gave out. She slid down the wall until she was sitting on the floor of the hallway, her back screaming in protest, her hands shaking in her lap. She could still hear them talking, Jessica's voice gaining enthusiasm as she described the amenities at Sunset Manor. The dining hall, the craft room, the scheduled activities that would keep Mary busy and out of their way. They even have a memory care unit, Jessica was saying, in case she develops dementia later. In case. As if Mary's future was already mapped out: decline, dementia, death. All tidily contained in a facility where Jessica wouldn't have to see it, wouldn't have to be inconvenienced by it. We should talk to her about it, David said. When she's feeling better. Of course, Jessica agreed. We'll frame it as an opportunity. More independence for her, really. Her own space, friends her age, medical care when she needs it. We'll make it sound appealing. They would make it sound appealing. Like they were doing her a favor. Like they were thinking of her happiness when really they were thinking of their convenience, their freedom from the burden she had become. Mary didn't know how long she sat there on the floor. Long enough for her back to seize up completely. Long enough for the afternoon shadows to grow long. Long enough to replay every sacrifice she had ever made for her son, every night she went hungry so he could eat, every dream she gave up so he could have his. Eventually, she heard footsteps approaching. She tried to stand but couldn't. Jessica appeared at the end of the hallway and stopped, her face shifting from surprise to annoyance. Mary, what are you doing on the floor? Mary looked up at her daughter-in-law. Jessica's face was perfectly made up, her hair freshly styled. She looked like someone who had never suffered, never sacrificed, never given up pieces of herself for others. I fell, Mary lied, her voice barely a whisper. Jessica sighed and called for David. Together, they helped Mary to her feet and back to her room, their hands efficient but cold, like nurses handling a difficult patient. They deposited her on the twin bed and left quickly, Jessica muttering about dinner preparation. Mary lay on the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling. The bell sat on her nightstand, untouched. She thought about Sunset Manor, about craft rooms and dining halls and scheduled activities designed to fill the empty hours until death. She thought about her house being sold, her belongings sorted through, her life condensed to what could fit in a single room in a facility. She turned her head toward the window. Outside, she could see the maple tree, its leaves beginning to turn gold with autumn. That tree would outlive her. It would stand in the yard long after she was gone, whether to Sunset Manor or to the grave. New owners would sit in its shade, not knowing that Mary had planted it, watered it, watched it grow from a sapling to this magnificent thing. The pain in her back was nothing compared to the pain in her chest. Her heart felt crushed, compressed, like her vertebrae before the surgery. But there was no operation that could fix this, no titanium screws that could hold together a broken heart. She had become a burden, a liability, a problem to be solved. Mary closed her eyes and made a decision. She would not go to Sunset Manor. She would not be warehoused, managed, contained. She would not let them sell her house to pay for her disposal. If they wanted freedom from her, she would give it to them. But on her terms, not theirs. She would get better. She would heal. And then she would disappear from their lives so completely that they would get exactly what they wanted, a life without the burden of Mary Thompson. The bell sat silent on the nightstand. Mary didn't ring it for dinner, didn't ring it when she needed the bathroom, didn't ring it when the pain became unbearable. She lay in the gathering darkness, planning her escape from the family that had already decided she was better off gone. 3 weeks had passed since Mary overheard the conversation about Sunset Manor. 3 weeks of pretending she hadn't heard, of serving meals to people planning her disposal, of sleeping in the narrow bed. While they discussed her future in whispers they thought she couldn't hear. Her back was healing, the incision becoming a pink line of scar tissue, the pain fading from screaming to whispering. She could walk without the wall now, could stand long enough to cook a simple meal, could shower without help. November arrived with rain that drummed against the windows like fingers tapping for attention. Mary stood in the kitchen on a Thursday morning, making breakfast as she had every morning since she could stand again. Eggs for David, over easy. Toast for Jessica, no butter, just that expensive avocado spread. Pancakes for the children, who would eat them quickly before school, syrup dripping on the table she would clean after they left. Jessica entered the kitchen in her workout clothes, her phone in one hand, coffee mug in the other. She moved through the space as if Mary wasn't there, reaching around her for the cream, taking the last of the orange juice without asking if Mary wanted any. "We're going away this weekend," Jessica announced, not to Mary but to the room in general, as if the walls might be interested. That beach house in Lincoln City finally had an opening. Mary flipped David's eggs, her hand steady on the spatula. "That sounds nice. When do you leave?" "Tomorrow afternoon. We'll be back Sunday night. Should I pack sandwiches for the drive?" Mary asked, already mentally cataloging what was in the refrigerator. Jessica looked at her then, really looked at her, with an expression Mary couldn't quite read. It was almost pity, but not quite. More like the way you'd look at a dog that doesn't understand it's not coming on the family vacation. "That won't be necessary," Jessica said. "It's just us. Family time. Just us." The words hung in the air like a blade waiting to fall. Mary's hand stilled on the spatula. "Just us," she repeated softly. "The kids need quality time with their parents," Jessica continued, scrolling through her phone. "We've been so stressed with everything. Work, the house situation, everything. We need this. The house situation." That's what Mary had become. Not a mother, not a grandmother, but a situation to be managed. David came in then, dressed for another job interview, his third this month. He kissed Jessica's cheek, ruffled Ryan's hair, sat down at his usual spot at the table. Mary placed his eggs in front of him, and he ate without looking up from his phone. "Did you tell Mom about the trip?" he asked Jessica. "Just now," Jessica replied. David finally looked at Mary. "You'll be okay here, right? We'll leave you some money for food." Some money for food. Like she was a teenager being left home alone for the first time. "I'll be fine," Mary said, her voice steady as her hands. Emma bounced into the kitchen, 11 years old and full of energy. "Grandma, are you coming to the beach with us?" Before Mary could answer, Jessica cut in. "Grandma needs to rest, sweetheart. She's still recovering. But she looks fine," Emma said, frowning. "You're fine, right, Grandma?" Mary smiled at her granddaughter, the only one who seemed to see her as more than furniture. "I'm much better, thank you for asking." "Then why can't you come?" Emma persisted. "Because it's a family trip," Jessica said firmly. "Just the 4 of us. Just the 4 of us." Mary watched Emma's face process this, watched her try to understand why Grandma wasn't included in family. The girl looked between her parents and Mary, confusion clear in her young eyes. "But Grandma is family," Emma said. "Of course she is," David said quickly, uncomfortably. "She just needs to rest." "Right, Mom?" Mary nodded, saving her son from his discomfort. "You have fun at the beach. Build a sandcastle for me." They left Friday afternoon in a flurry of suitcases and excited chatter. Mary stood at the window, watching them load the car. Jessica had packed enough for a week, not a weekend. David carried the boogie boards they had bought last summer, the ones Mary had paid for because they were short that month. The children were already arguing about who would sit where, their voices bright with anticipation. Nobody hugged her goodbye. David waved from the driver's seat. Jessica didn't look back at all. The children were already looking at their tablets. The trip begun. Grandma forgotten before they reached the end of the driveway. Mary stood at the window long after the car disappeared, watching the empty street, the rain starting again, soft at first, then harder. The house felt different with them gone. Not peaceful, but hollow, like a shell abandoned by its creature. She walked through the rooms slowly, seeing them with new eyes. The living room Jessica had redecorated, where Mary's family photos had been replaced with generic art. The master bedroom that had been hers, where Jessica's clothes filled the closet Mary had shared with Robert. The children's rooms, bright and full of toys Mary had bought, books Mary had read to them, clothes Mary had washed 1,000 times. In the kitchen, she opened the refrigerator. It was full of food for them: Jessica's organic yogurt, David's craft beer, the children's juice boxes and string cheese. Mary looked for something of hers, something she had chosen, something she enjoyed. There was nothing. The bread was the multigrain kind Jessica insisted on, not the soft white bread Mary had eaten all her life. The milk was almond, not dairy. The cheese was some expensive aged variety, not the simple cheddar she preferred. Even the condiments were wrong: aioli instead of mayonnaise, Dijon instead of yellow mustard, balsamic instead of the plain vinegar she had used for 40 years. Mary closed the refrigerator and opened the pantry. Jessica's protein powders, David's specialty coffee, organic pasta, quinoa, things with labels and languages Mary didn't recognize. Her flour was there, pushed to the back, and her sugar, but nothing else that was hers. She moved to the bathroom. Jessica's skincare routine covered the counter serums and creams that cost more than Mary's weekly groceries. David's expensive shampoo, his beard oil, his cologne. The children's bubble bath, their special toothpaste. Mary's things were under the sink, hidden away: generic soap, store-brand shampoo, the same moisturizer she had used for 20 years. She was a ghost in her own house, invisible, her presence erased except for the services she provided. Mary walked to the hallway and faced the mirror there, the full-length one Robert had hung when they first moved in. The woman looking back at her was a stranger. Thin, too thin, her face gaunt from weeks of pain and insufficient food. Her hair, once thick and dark, now gray and limp, pulled back in the same style she'd worn for decades. Because when had there been time or money for anything else? She looked at her hands, mapped with veins and spots, nails short and unpolished. These hands had built a life, raised a child, cleaned thousands of rooms, cooked 10,000 meals. Now they hung at her sides, empty, belonging to a woman who wasn't part of the family that lived in her house, ate at her table, slept in her bed. Mary stared at herself for a long time. She thought about Sunset Manor, about dying alone in a small room while her family lived in her house. She thought about the beach, about the four of them laughing in the sand, taking photos that wouldn't include her, making memories she wasn't part of. If they want freedom, she said to her reflection, her voice strong and clear in the empty house, I'll give it to them. The woman in the mirror smiled then, a smile Mary hadn't seen in years. Not the practiced smile she wore for others, not the tired smile of endurance, but something else. Something that looked like the girl she had been before life broke her down, before service became her only purpose. Before she disappeared into the needs of others. Mary turned from the mirror and walked to her small room. She pulled out the old address book she kept in the nightstand drawer, found the number she was looking for. Her friend Elaine, who had moved to the coast years ago, who had been asking Mary to visit, to stay, to start over. She picked up her phone and dialed. It rang 3 times before Elaine's warm voice answered. Mary? Is that really you? It's me, Mary said. I need to ask you something. Anything, honey. You know that. Mary sat on the edge of the narrow bed, looking out at the maple tree, its leaves brilliant gold in the gray November light. If I wanted to start over, Mary said slowly, if I wanted to leave everything behind and start fresh, would there be room for me there? There was a pause, then Elaine's voice, firm and sure. There's always room for you here, Mary. Always. Mary nodded, though Elaine couldn't see her. Good, she said. Because I think it's time. Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing the streets clean, preparing for something new. Mary sat in her small room in the house that was hers but not hers, and began to plan her resurrection. Not the slow, managed decline they had planned for her, but something else entirely. Freedom. Real freedom. The kind that comes from choosing your own path, even if that path leads away from everything you've known, everyone you've loved, every sacrifice you've made. The family would return Sunday night, full of stories from their weekend, their family weekend. They would find Mary there, serving dinner, cleaning up, playing her role. They wouldn't know that everything had changed, that the woman serving them had already left, that what remained was just the shell, counting down the days until she could shed it entirely. If they wanted freedom from her, she would give it to them. But first, she would take her own. Monday morning arrived wrapped in Portland's typical November gray, a dampness that settled into bones and stayed there like unwanted guests. Mary Thompson stood at her kitchen window, her breath fogging the glass slightly as she watched David's blue Honda Accord disappear down Willow Creek Road. He was heading to yet another job interview, his 5th this month. Wearing the same navy tie she had given him 3 Christmases ago when she was still a mother rather than a service provider. Jessica had left 10 minutes earlier in her white Lexus SUV. Her voice sharp with complaint about having to drive the children to school, about Portland traffic, about everything that dared to inconvenience her carefully orchestrated life. The house exhaled into profound silence around Mary, the kind of quiet that pressed against eardrums. She moved with deliberate purpose, knowing she had exactly 6 hours before anyone returned. Her slippers whispered against the hardwood as she walked to her small room, the guest room in her own house, and opened the narrow closet door. Reaching past the 3 house dresses she rotated through each week, she pulled out her good coat, the gray wool one she had purchased 10 years ago for David's college graduation. The coat had cost $200 then, an extravagance she had saved for over 6 months to afford, setting aside $20 here, $30 there, hidden in an envelope marked electricity, so David wouldn't ask questions. It still fit, though it hung looser now on her frame that had shrunk from months of pain and eating only what was left after everyone else had their fill. Her brown leather purse, soft with age and use, contained everything she needed for this mission that would change everything. The manila folder, rescued from David's old school supplies, held 40 years of her life in paper form. The deed with only her name in bold black type. The mortgage documents stamped paid in full in red ink 5 years ago, a moment of triumph she had celebrated alone with a cup of tea. Property tax receipts filed chronologically in a system she had maintained since 1984. The title insurance policy with its official seal. Even the original purchase agreement from when she and Robert had stood in this very house, young and full of hope. Signing their names with hands that trembled with excitement rather than age and arthritis. She checked the documents twice, then 3 times, her fingers trembling slightly as she rifled through the papers, making sure everything was there. This was her proof, her evidence that despite everything, this house belonged to Mary Thompson alone. Not to David, not to Jessica, not to the grandchildren. To her. She called the taxi from the landline in the kitchen, the old beige phone mounted on the wall that Jessica always mocked as antiquated. Mary didn't want this call appearing on her cell phone bill that David monitored with the vigilance of a suspicious accountant. Portland Taxi Service, the dispatcher answered with the weariness of someone working the morning shift. 20 minutes, she said when Mary gave the address. Mary waited by the front door, coat buttoned to her chin against the cold she would soon face, purse clutched against her chest like armor protecting her heart. The taxi arrived in 18 minutes. The driver was a young Somali man named Hassan, according to the license displayed on the dashboard next to a small photo of 3 smiling children. He played soft jazz that filled the car with melancholy saxophone notes that seemed to understand her mood. The heat was turned up so high that the windows fogged immediately, creating a cocoon that separated them from the gray Portland morning. Mary cracked her window slightly, needing the sharp November air to keep her nerves from unraveling completely. The cold rushed in, carrying the scent of wet leaves and distant coffee shops opening for the morning rush. "Where to, ma'am?" Hassan asked, his accent musical, respectful. Mark Ellis and Associates Real Estate, Mary replied, surprised her voice sounded so steady. On Burnside Street, the ride took 22 minutes through Portland's morning traffic, each minute stretching like pulled taffy, simultaneously eternal and frighteningly fleeting. Mary watched the familiar neighborhoods pass by, the streets she had driven for 40 years. The coffee shops where she had never stopped because $4 for coffee seemed absurd when you could make it at home for cents. The grocery store where she bought the cheaper cuts of meat, the ones that needed slow cooking to become tender, like her. The park where she had pushed David on swings, then Emma and Ryan, the same swings, the same push, but somehow everything different. The real estate office occupied a corner unit in a strip mall that had seen better days. Its parking lot cracked like old skin, weeds growing through the asphalt's wounds. It sat sandwiched between a nail salon advertising specials in garish neon pink. That hurt to look at, and a tax preparation service already decorated with premature Christmas wreaths, though Thanksgiving was still weeks away. Mary had discovered Mark Ellis in last Sunday's newspaper, in an article about Portland's exploding housing market that she had read while her family slept. He specialized in quick, discreet sales. The article had used the word, discreet, 3 times. That word had sung to her like a promise. The receptionist looked perhaps 25, the age Mary had been when Robert died, though this girl would never know that kind of devastating loss. She had perfectly straightened blonde hair that fell like a curtain and acrylic nails painted burgundy that clicked against her keyboard like tiny castanets. She looked up with the practiced cheerfulness of someone trained to greet potential commissions walking through the door. Good morning. Welcome to Mark Ellis and Associates. Do you have an appointment scheduled with us today? No, Mary said, her voice emerging steadier than her hands, which she kept folded tightly to hide their trembling. But I need to speak with Mr. Ellis about selling my house. Today, if possible. It's quite urgent. Something in Mary's tone, perhaps the desperation bleeding through, despite her efforts to contain it, made the receptionist's commercial smile shift to genuine concern. Her fingers paused on the keyboard. Let me check if he's available. May I have your name, please? Mary Thompson. Please have a seat, Mrs. Thompson. I'll see if Mr. Ellis can see you. Mary sat in the waiting area, a space trying too hard to appear successful with its black leather chairs that squeaked when she moved. And a glass coffee table covered in real estate magazines featuring houses she could never have afforded. She kept her hands folded over her purse, her mother's wedding ring loose on her finger, and studied the photographs covering the pale yellow walls. Happy families standing before houses with red sold signs, Mark Ellis. Grinning beside them with his arm often thrown casually around the husband's shoulders or his hand on a wife's shoulder. Everyone looking toward futures bright with promise. Mrs. Thompson? Mark Ellis appeared in the doorway after 8 minutes that felt like hours. He was younger than she expected, perhaps 45, with sandy hair starting to thin at the crown. A coffee stain decorated his white shirt like a brown badge of humanity, right above his heart. Please, come in. I'm Mark Ellis. How can I help you today? His office smelled like leather chairs and morning coffee, with an undertone of vanilla air freshener trying to mask both. More photographs covered these walls, but also certificates, awards from the Portland Real Estate Board, testimonials in gold frames from satisfied clients. A successful man who knew how to move houses quickly and quietly. Her research had been correct. Please, have a seat, Mark said, settling behind his mahogany desk that was slightly too large for the room. Making Mary wonder if he had bought it hoping to move to a bigger office someday. Can I get you anything? Coffee? Water? We have tea if you prefer. No, thank you, Mary said, pulling out her manila folder with hands that trembled slightly as she opened it. I need to sell my house. Quickly and quietly. No sign in the yard, no open houses, no one knowing until it's completely done. Can you do that? Mark's eyebrows rose slightly, but his expression remained professionally neutral, like a doctor receiving concerning test results. He accepted the folder and examined each document carefully, occasionally making small, approving sounds that reminded Mary of David when he was little and she would show him her drawings. This is all in your name alone. No other parties? No spousal interest? No liens? My husband died 37 years ago. I've owned it by myself ever since. And you're absolutely certain you want to sell? This is a significant decision, Mrs. Thompson. Perhaps you'd like to discuss it with your family first? Take some time to think it over? Mary thought of everything that had brought her here, and her voice came out firm. I'm certain. My family doesn't need to know. How fast can it happen? In this market? Very fast. Willow Creek is highly desirable. We could list at $450,000, possibly get more. I have cash buyers ready. We could close in 2 weeks. Do it, Mary said. Wednesday brought the young couple, Tom and Sarah, she 5 months pregnant. They walked through her house with wonder, seeing future instead of past. At the maple tree, Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Our children will play here. We'll take it, Tom said. Full asking price. Cash. Mary accepted, knowing that tree would shelter new dreams. Thursday evening, Elaine called about the cottage by the sea. Ocean views. Walking distance to everything. Available immediately. 2 weeks, Mary said, sealing her fate. She had given them 40 years. The rest would be hers alone, starting in exactly 336 hours. She began to count. The sound of tires crunching on gravel announced their return from Hawaii like thunder before a storm. Mary Thompson stood in the center of the empty living room, her hands perfectly steady at her sides, watching through the bare window as David's blue Honda Accord pulled into the driveway. Sunday evening, 6:43 according to the grandfather clock that would belong to someone else tomorrow. The new owners would take possession at noon. Less than 18 hours remained in this house that had contained her entire adult life for 40 years. She had spent the afternoon cleaning one final time. The hardwood floors gleamed with fresh polish that made the empty rooms echo. The windows sparkled, free of fingerprints and fog. The kitchen counters were bare except for a large pot of soup simmering on the stove, filling the hollow house with familiar aromas of carrots, celery, onions, and herbs from the garden she would never tend again. Every surface had been cleaned with the methodical precision she had learned during 35 years at the Cascade View Hotel. Though this time she cleaned not for ungrateful guests but as farewell. Through the window, she watched them emerge from the car, their skin golden brown from Hawaiian sun. Their movements loose and relaxed from 7 days of freedom from her presence. Jessica wore a new sundress, bright yellow with hibiscus flowers that looked expensive. David had let his beard grow during vacation. The children tumbled out of the backseat arguing about something from the beach. Emma carried a stuffed sea turtle that must have cost $30. Ryan wore a t-shirt that said, Aloha, in rainbow letters. David reached the sold sign first. He had been pulling their matching suitcase from the trunk when his hand froze mid-motion. The suitcase handle slipped from his fingers. The bag toppled onto the driveway with a thud Mary could hear from inside. His mouth opened, closed, opened again like a fish gasping in air it couldn't breathe. Jessica, busy gathering shopping bags full of souvenirs, nearly walked into David's frozen form. David, what are you doing? Help me with... Her voice cut off as her gaze followed his to the sign. The shopping bags slid from her arms, spilling wrapped packages across concrete. A snow globe with a hula dancer rolled toward the garage, the dancer still swaying in her liquid prison. What is that? Jessica's voice climbed to a pitch Mary had never heard, sharp enough to cut glass. David, what is that sign doing there? Emma and Ryan stopped their chatter, standing beside their parents, looking at the sign with confused expressions of children who know something important is happening but cannot grasp its meaning. Maybe it's a mistake, David said, but his voice lacked conviction. He was already looking at the house with growing dread, at windows where curtains were gone, at the front door standing ajar though Mary never left doors open. They rushed toward the house as one unit, leaving luggage and souvenirs scattered like shipwreck debris. Mary didn't move from her position in the center of the empty room. She stood with spine straight, hands clasped loosely in front of her, wearing the navy dress she had bought for Robert's funeral 37 years ago. It still fit, though looser now on her worn frame. It seemed appropriate for another kind of death. The front door burst open with such force it hit the wall. David stood frozen in the doorway, his Hawaiian tan draining from his face as he took in the empty room. Gone was the leather couch where he spent evenings scrolling his phone. Gone was the 65-inch television. Gone were family pictures, lamps, the coffee table Jessica had chosen. Only the grandfather clock remained, ticking toward noon. Mom. David's voice cracked like a teenager's, raw with shock. What is that sign doing on our lawn? Our lawn. Even now, even faced with evidence of her sole ownership, he claimed possession of what had never been his. Jessica pushed past her frozen husband, her vacation hair already coming undone. Her eyes swept the barren room with wild desperation. Where's the china cabinet? Where are the pictures? Mary, what have you done? Mary turned slowly to face them, her movement deliberate and calm as a hurricane's eye. Evening light through bare windows cast long shadows across the empty floor. She stood in a pool of golden sunset like an actor on stage who had waited 40 years to deliver these lines. I sold the house, she said, her voice steady as bedrock. The words hung in the air between them like frozen breath. David's mouth opened and closed several times before sound emerged. You sold it? You sold our house? Without telling us? Mary tilted her head slightly, a gesture she had seen Jessica make when correcting children. It's not your house, David. It never was. The deed is in my name alone. But we live here. Jessica's face had gone from pale to red to purple. Our children live here. Their rooms, their things, everything we own is here. Your belongings are in the garage, Mary said, her tone neutral as weather forecasts. Everything boxed and labeled. The moving truck you'll need can pull right up to the garage door. David took 3 stumbling steps forward, then stopped as if hitting an invisible wall. His hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. Mom, this is insane. You can't just sell the house. Where are we supposed to go? You're both 42 years old, Mary said, allowing steel to enter her voice. You have college degrees I paid for with my broken back. You have work experience. You have each other. You'll figure it out. The children had crept into the doorway. Emma clutched Ryan's hand, both wide-eyed with fear. Emma still held her sea turtle against her chest for protection. Grandma, Emma said softly, trembling, why is everything gone? Mary's resolve wavered momentarily at her granddaughter's frightened face. But then she remembered all the afternoons picking them up while Jessica got manicures, all the dinners cooked. While David played video games, all the sacrifices taken for granted like air. Because I'm moving, sweetheart, she said gently. To a new home by the ocean. When do we have to be out? David whispered. When is closing? Tomorrow at noon. Tomorrow? Jessica shrieked, the sound bouncing off empty walls. You're giving us less than 24 hours? That's impossible. That's the same notice you gave me for Sunset Manor, Mary interrupted, her voice carrying 40 years of suppressed anger. Did you think I didn't hear? Did you think I was too broken to understand when you called me a liability? David's face drained completely. Mom, we were just discussing options. Options, Mary repeated. When your father died, my option was destroying my back as a hotel maid so you could eat. When you needed school supplies, my option was skipping lunch. When you wanted those $100 basketball shoes, my option was extra shifts until my hands bled. When you moved here during the pandemic, my option was becoming a servant in my own home. When I needed surgery, my option was going alone because your interview was more important. Mom, please. I cooked your meals, cleaned your house, raised your children, washed your clothes, gave you 40 years, and you called it nothing. Jessica called me a live-in maid. You were planning to warehouse me at Sunset Manor, sell my house to pay for it. Well, I saved you the trouble. I'm gone. You're free. What about the kids? David's voice broke, tears streaming down his face. They need their grandmother. Mary looked at her son and felt only pity. They have parents. You'll manage, like I did. She walked past them toward the door. At the threshold, she turned back. They stood in the middle of the barren room like refugees from their own lives. There's soup on the stove. Help yourselves. It's the last meal I'll cook in this kitchen. She left them there and walked to her small room where her single suitcase waited. Behind her, she heard Emma crying, Ryan asking confused questions, David and Jessica arguing about hotels, lawyers, and possibilities. Mary sat on the narrow bed one last time, looking at the maple tree silhouetted against darkening sky. Tomorrow it would shade new owners. Tomorrow she would wake by the ocean, free from being needed but not wanted, used but not valued. The grandfather clock chimed 7 times. 17 hours until noon. 17 hours until the end of Mary the servant and the beginning of Mary the free. Through thin walls, she heard her family processing their new reality. She closed her eyes and pictured ocean waves washing footprints clean, making everything new with each tide. Tomorrow couldn't come soon enough. The cottage sat 3 blocks from the Oregon coast, a weathered structure that had endured decades of salt air and winter storms. Mary Thompson stood in the doorway on her first morning, holding a cup of coffee that was still hot because no one had interrupted her. Tuesday, November 23, 3 days after leaving Willow Creek Road. The young pregnant couple had arrived at noon precisely, faces glowing with joy while David and Jessica loaded a rental truck in bitter silence. The cottage was everything her old house had never been: small, simple, entirely hers. 2 bedrooms though she needed only one. A bathroom with a clawfoot tub where she could soak without someone knocking. A kitchen with a window facing east toward the ocean, where she could watch sunrise paint the sky pink and gold. The living room held only what she needed: a comfortable thrift store chair, a small television she might never turn on, a bookshelf already filling with novels she'd always wanted to read. Beside her feet, Daisy stretched and yawned. Mary had found the golden retriever at the shelter her second day in town. 7 years old, abandoned by a family who moved and decided she was too much trouble. Mary understood that abandonment. She had knelt by Daisy's cage, looking into brown eyes that held the same weariness she saw in mirrors, and knew they belonged together. 2 discarded souls with life left to live. "Come on, girl," Mary said softly. Daisy followed her onto the small wooden deck facing the ocean. The Pacific stretched before them, endless gray-blue in morning light. Waves rolled in with rhythmic certainty, each one washing the beach clean, erasing yesterday's footprints. The sound was constant but never monotonous, a breathing rhythm that had continued long before her birth and would continue long after. She found comfort in that permanence. The ocean never forgot to send waves. Never called you a liability. Never went to Hawaii without you. Mary sipped her coffee and watched an elderly couple walking hand in hand along the beach. They moved slowly, examining shells, pointing at seabirds, comfortable in shared silence. That could have been her and Robert if the scaffolding hadn't collapsed. But that story ended 37 years ago. This was new, and she was writing it alone. The coffee was good, medium roast from the local market where she was already learning rhythms of her new life. The owner, Mr. Chen, had remembered her name on her second visit. "Good morning, Mary," he'd said, as if she'd always belonged. Fresh salmon came in today. Beautiful fish. She'd bought it and cooked it that night, sitting at her small table, eating in peaceful silence, tasting every bite. After breakfast 2 eggs, toast, orange juice. She didn't have to share. Mary clipped Daisy's leash and walked to the beach. Sand was firm near water, easy on her healing back. Dr. Martinez had been right about the surgery's success. Without constant stress of serving others, lifting and bending, her body was finally healing. She could walk 30 minutes now without pain, impossible just months ago. The beach was mostly empty this Tuesday morning. Joggers passed, nodding greeting. A woman threw a ball for her black lab, the dog racing through waves with pure joy. Mary and Daisy walked north toward Haystack Rock, the massive sea stack rising from ocean like something from another world. "Beautiful morning, isn't it?" a voice said behind her. Mary turned to find a woman with silver hair and kind eyes, wearing purple raincoat and rubber boots. "It is," Mary agreed. "I don't think I'll ever tire of this view." "New to town? I'm Ruth. Think I saw you at St. Peter's on Sunday." Mary had attended the small church 3 blocks from her cottage, sitting in back, singing remembered hymns. "Yes, just moved here last week." "I'm Mary. Welcome. You picked perfect timing. Winter's quiet here, peaceful. Tourists won't descend until summer." Ruth smiled. "I help coordinate the farmers market on Saturdays. Always looking for volunteers if interested." "I'd like that," Mary said, surprised she meant it. Ruth walked with them briefly, chatting about the town, restaurants, the library's Thursday book club. She had an easy way, comfortable with silences. When parting, Ruth squeezed Mary's hand gently. "Takes courage to start over," she said. "Whatever brought you here, hope you find what you're looking for." That afternoon, Mary sat in her chair with a book bought years ago but never opened. Daisy curled at her feet, sighing contentment. The cottage was quiet except for distant waves and seagull cries. No one asked when dinner would be ready. No one complained about temperature. No one left dishes expecting her to wash them. At 5, she put down her book and went to make dinner. For the first time in 40 years, she cooked for one. Single chicken breast seasoned with rosemary and lemon the way she liked. Small salad with good olive oil she could finally afford. Glass of white wine sipped while cooking, not gulped while hiding from chaos. She ate at her table, watching ocean as sunset. Sky turned orange, pink, purple, a daily show costing nothing but attention. Daisy lay nearby, not begging because Mary had already shared, recognizing her as family in ways human family never had. After dinner, she walked Daisy along quiet neighborhood streets. Houses were small, weathered by salt air, gardens full of hardy coastal plants. Some windows glowed with family dinners, children's voices carrying out. Mary felt no envy, no longing to be inside those windows. She had her own light now, small but steady. Back home, she ran a hot bath in the clawfoot tub, adding lavender salts bought just because she wanted them. She soaked an hour, not rushing, not listening for someone needing the bathroom. Hot water soothed muscles slowly learning to relax after 40 years of tension. In her bedroom arranged exactly as she wanted, she put on new pajamas. Not the worn nightgown she'd had for years, but soft flannel covered in tiny sailboats. Silly, frivolous, exactly what Jessica would mock. Perfect. Before bed, she stood at the window looking at ocean. Moon was almost full, laying silver path across dark water. Waves continued their eternal rhythm. Somewhere inland, David and Jessica were probably in a hotel, still arguing about lawyers and unfairness. Children probably confused, asking why Grandma left. Maybe someday she'd explain. Maybe they'd understand that love wasn't just giving until nothing remained. Maybe they'd learn grandmothers deserved more than servitude. Or maybe they never would understand, and that was okay. Their understanding was no longer required for her happiness. Daisy jumped onto the bed, circling 3 times before settling against Mary's legs. The weight was comforting, warm, reminder she wasn't alone in solitude. She'd chosen this companion who gave as much as received, who saw not a service provider but a friend. Mary pulled quilts to her chin, handmade ones from an estate sale, someone else's grandmother's handiwork keeping her warm. Through the window, she heard ocean's ancient song. Tomorrow she'd wake when ready, not when demanded. She'd make breakfast for one, walk the beach, maybe visit Ruth's mentioned library. She'd volunteer at Saturday's market because she wanted to. She'd build life measured in her contentment, not others' convenience. She thought of the maple tree on Willow Creek Road, now belonging to strangers. It would bloom in spring without her. The couple's baby would play beneath its branches. As it should be. Trees grew toward sun regardless of who planted them. Mary closed her eyes, listening to ocean breathe. In and out, reliable as heartbeat. She whispered to darkness, to cottage, to new life, to the woman she was becoming at 65. You made it, Mary. For the first time in 40 years, she fell asleep without worrying about tomorrow's breakfast for others, without setting alarms. She slept to waves and Daisy's gentle snoring, wrapped in chosen quilts, in her bed, her home, her life at last. March arrived at the Oregon coast with unexpected warmth, false spring that tricked gardens into early blooming. Mary Thompson sat on her cottage deck, watching morning sun turn the Pacific from gray to brilliant blue. 4 months had passed since she left Portland, since she sold the house on Willow Creek Road, since she chose herself for the first time in 65 years. Coffee steamed in the ceramic mug she'd bought at Saturday market, waves painted in cobalt blue around the rim. Daisy lay at her feet, golden fur warm in sunshine, occasionally watching seagulls argue over beach scraps. The dog had filled out these months, coat glossy, eyes bright. Regular meals and daily walks had transformed her from anxious shelter dog into confident companion. Mary scratched behind Daisy's ears, feeling her contented sigh. The morning routine had become sacred. Wake naturally around 6:30. Let Daisy into the small yard. Make coffee while watching sunrise. Sit on deck with first cup, planning nothing more than which beach to walk, which book to read. These small choices felt like luxury after 40 years of days dictated by others' needs. She was reading a mystery novel when Daisy suddenly stood, ears perked, whining softly. Mary looked up to see a figure walking up the gravel path. The person moved slowly, shoulders hunched, and it took a moment to recognize the gait. Her coffee mug trembled as she set it down. David looked like he'd aged 5 years in 4 months. Face gaunt, cheeks hollow beneath neglected stubble. Clothes, jeans and wrinkled shirt hung loose on his thinned frame. Dark circles shadowed his eyes like bruises. He stopped at the deck steps, looking up with an expression she hadn't seen since he was 7 and had broken. Her mother's vase, that mixture of guilt and desperation and hope that she might fix what he'd shattered. "Hello, Mom," he said, voice rough from disuse. Mary stood slowly, book falling closed. She hadn't expected this, hadn't prepared for her son looking so defeated. Part of her, the part that spent 40 years responding to his needs, wanted to rush down and embrace him. But she stayed put, gripping the railing. "David," she said, neither warm nor cold. "May I come up?" The politeness, the request for permission, told her how much had changed. She nodded, watched him climb the 3 steps like an old man. Daisy retreated behind Mary's legs, watchful but not aggressive. "Sit," Mary said, gesturing to the other chair. David sank down with visible relief. They sat in silence, ocean filling space between them. She could see him taking in her cottage, her herb garden, her Pacific view. "Your place is nice," he finally said. "Peaceful." "It is," Mary agreed, offering nothing more. His hands twisted in his lap, the nervous childhood habit. "I'll make coffee," she said, needing a moment. In the kitchen, she moved deliberately, measuring grounds, arranging 2 mugs. Through the window, she saw David slumped in the chair, looking lost. She started to add milk, remembering his preference, then stopped. That was old Mary, anticipating needs. She carried out black coffee only. "Thank you," David said, wrapping hands around the mug for warmth. They sat while he sipped, winced at bitterness, didn't ask for milk. Finally, he turned to face her, eyes red-rimmed. "Jessica left," he said quietly. "Took the kids to her sister's in California. Said she didn't sign up for this, for starting over in a rental, for me being unemployed, for life without a safety net." Mary said nothing, waiting. She'd learned the power of silence these 4 months. "I got a job finally. Entry-level accounting, half what I made before. The apartment's small, 2 bedrooms. Jessica says kids need stability, better schools, things I can't provide. Divorce papers came last week." His voice broke on divorce. Tears slid down stubbled cheeks, creating dark spots on his shirt. "I have lost everything, Mom. My family, home, career. I don't know how you did it, starting over with nothing. I can't do this alone." She saw it in his eyes, the question he'd come to ask. Before he could speak, she knew. He wanted to come home. To move in. To have her fix everything like always. "Mom," he said, leaning forward desperately. "Could I come here? Just temporarily, until I'm back on my feet? I could help with rent. We could be family again, properly. I understand now what you did all those years. I'm sorry for everything. Please, can we come live with you?" "We." Even now, broken and alone, he said "we," as if his problems were automatically hers to solve. Mary stood, walked to the railing, looking at the ocean. A container ship moved slowly across the horizon. She thought of all her mornings at this railing, breathing freedom, becoming herself. Behind her, David shifted, probably already planning his things in her spare room. She turned back, smiling gently, no mockery but no surrender. She picked up both coffee mugs. "No, son," she said, voice kind but firm. "You already have a home. You have an apartment, a job, a chance to rebuild. Go make it better." David's face crumpled. "Mom, please. I need you. You need to learn to stand alone," Mary said. "The way I did. The way everyone must." But you're my mother, he said, as if that meant eternal sacrifice. I am. And I love you. I'll always love you. But love doesn't mean giving up my life for yours anymore. I gave you 40 years, David. Everything I had until nothing remained of me. Now it's my turn. She walked past him, set mugs in the sink, returned to find him standing, sobbing uncontrollably. Will you visit? He asked, voice small as a child's. Perhaps. When you've built something worth showing. When you can invite me as guest, not servant. When you see Mary, not just your mother. David stood there, looking at her as if seeing her for the first time. Then he nodded, wiped his face, walked to his car. At the door, he turned. I love you, Mom. I love you too, David. That's why I'm saying no. She watched him drive away, car disappearing around the bend toward Highway 101. Then she returned to her chair, picked up her novel, found her place. Daisy settled at her feet, crisis past, peace restored. The sun climbed higher, warming the deck, painting ocean in turquoise and jade. Mary sipped cool coffee, still hers, and felt something lift from her shoulders, some last weight she hadn't known she carried. She had said no. She had chosen herself. The world hadn't ended. A neighbor passed below, waving. Beautiful morning, Mary. Beautiful indeed, Mary called back, meaning it. She looked at the horizon where sea met sky in endless possibility. Beyond that line were places never seen, experiences never had, versions of herself never allowed to become. At 65, she was finally free to discover them all. She closed her book, stood, stretched in sunshine. Come on, Daisy. Let's walk. They went to the beach, woman and dog, two souls who'd found each other in second chances. Waves washed over Mary's bare feet, cold and shocking and perfect. She laughed, free as the wheeling seabirds. I'm not someone's mother today, she said to ocean, sky, herself. I'm me. And that, after 65 years, was finally enough. More than enough. Everything. What did you feel while watching Mary's story? Did any part of it remind you of your own life or someone you love? Many women spend years giving everything to others, forgetting that they, too, deserve peace. So tell us, what does freedom mean to you today? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's remind each other that we're not invisible, and that it's never too late to begin again. And if Mary's courage inspired you, please like this video and subscribe, so more of us can find the strength to choose themselves. Thank you for being part of our journey today. This has been Story Theater.